Good afternoon, and welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our next session, The Long View, Energy, Opportunity, and the Road Ahead. If time allows, at the end of the session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR code located on the screen. Please be sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the conversation, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Pierre, Executive Director of the Tulane Energy Institute.
Well, good. Thank you very much. I don't get that kind of round of applause when I start class, so maybe we'll try to work that into the future class sessions. Thank you, Roger. Well, thanks for being here this afternoon as we continue to talk about energy, the future of energy, and we shift gears a little bit. We move from power and utilities, and we're going to talk about the oil and gas industry with a real expert that we're fortunate to have. So first, a little bit about my fireside chat interviewee here. Roger Jenkins, the former CEO, recently retired from Murphy Oil. Roger started his career in the industry after a petroleum engineering degree at LSU, and initially he went to work in the field, if you will, in a hands-on role as an offshore drilling supervisor. Rose through the ranks of Texaco before moving on to even more leadership roles at Murphy, including the chief operating officer and the president of the E&P company, before becoming the president and CEO of Murphy in 2013. And along the way, I might add, he earned his MBA from the Freeman School of Business while he was working in the industry with all of those roles. Roger has guided significant operations and execution of large and complex investments, both domestically and around the world, in conventional and unconventional oil and gas, and uniquely in some deep water activities as well, which is becoming more and more topical. Having recently retired, he's devoting more time to promoting education and the development of the next generation of energy leaders, with involvement on the LSU Foundation, as well as on the boards of the National Petroleum Council and the American Petroleum Institute. So it's fitting that have you here and discuss the future of energy, and significantly here at Tulane, where I too am most interested in ensuring the next generation of energy leaders can chart the best path to where we want to be. So Roger, thanks for being here. I want to cover a few areas, just a preview. I'd like to explore your vision of what you think the energy future looks like for oil and gas, talk about some insights in leadership in industry, and then maybe highlight some of your decision-making frameworks and things. I think as we develop these industry leaders, you know, what should they be considering as they make some of the important decisions that you've had the history in. But first, sort of based on your experience at leading Murphy in the last since 2013, you know, how do you see the oil and gas sector evolving in the next 20 years in terms of, you know, like employment, expansion, consolidation? Where do you see the industry going, Roger?
Thank you, Pierre. Thanks for having me here today back at Tulane. It's been a long time since I've been on campus. I see an energized, incredibly growing campus here at Tulane. I believe that oil and gas can be here to stay for a very long time. We've had a lot of opportunity in the prior administration and post-COVID to make a big change in energy transition, but the transition is very slow. All energy transitions are very slow if you look back in history. And you know, I see us at a time where today, you know, all the energy is around 80-something% is fossil fuels. I do see over time more increase in gas, more increase in LNG, more increase in global gas for power, AI, and uses all over the world. The big gas tech conference going on today in Italy was very pro about all the gas that will be needed in Europe and different sanctions and various things through that regime. I think that just see it as a very small decrease in energy over time being, I see fossil fuel continue to lead. We have to keep in mind that great improvements have been made on emissions by all oil companies. And just a kind of a scope, in 10 years, $9 trillion has been spent on renewables, and they're growing at 0.5% a year of total energy. And 20 years ago, it was 84% fossil fuels, and it's 82% today. So I just see a lot of peak demand to the right and long-term need for oil and gas and fossil fuels.
Do you think the makeup of the industry changes with, and you led a very successful independent, how do you see the complexion of the majors and the super majors as they move into bigger and more complex deep water projects? Does the makeup of the industry change?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, you have these big mega projects are primarily offshore. Of course, the execution of the onshore Permian are quite big projects execute as well, and are probably run more like that way today than they were 5 years ago, post all the consolidation. You see certain companies, if you work offshore, and there's not many independents that do globally, you must maintain an ability to execute these big capital projects. It's very difficult today to find any major deep water project in the world less than $2 billion of capital, and usually a 3 to 4 year execution period. All that's very critical to get online, on time, under the budget, to make the rate of return of the sanction at a challenged oil price. So I see independents still having employees from super majors who want to go faster and want to have less process and have smaller teams to execute. And super majors will always have their process, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, and they will execute around the same way. But they're all getting better than they were because they've had trouble with it before, and they're all rapidly improving. But if you have good subsurface and you have the oil, you can win. Yeah. That's the ultimate thing.
Well, continuing on with sort of your experiences at Murphy, what...
These are nothing like the questions you sent me, by the way. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm just making up new ones.
That's fine.
What sort of, so strategic decisions you had to make in your career, what were some challenging ones, be they around, acquisitions, divestitures? We were talking about some of that earlier, but, expansion. How do you approach these big strategic decisions you had to make?
I was a CEO in a very different time in the business. I became CEO in 2013. Oil prices were very high. There was a lot of growth in the business, a lot of growth in onshore United States production. Offshore had taken a bit of a back seat to onshore growth. And then we had, of course, our first big OPEC collapse, and really from 14 through 16. So then you had a period of growth with a lot of employees and a big drop in oil prices. And Murphy had gone through a big transition of being an integrated company down to just an oil and gas company with a very successful retail business. And the retail business was spun out of the company. The company made a lot of free cash flow. We had a very large dividend. And at that time, a debt level that was quite normal in industry. It became really unnormal pretty quickly with these big collapses. And when we get out of that period and things were quite stable for a while, but not very high oil prices, then of course oil runs up, then COVID. So I had two big collapses in my career, along with all my peers, and it made a lot of different kind of calls around consolidation, selling, things around ESG, things to move the company forward and build the company back up with a new portfolio without the successful downstream component that we had, which we're able to do and go through COVID and reduce a lot of debt and got the dividend back to where it was years ago. So it was a lot of ups and downs. I did close a historic headquarters office and move that to Houston. We made enormous, changed our G&A expenses by 50% or more, closed offices all over the place, consolidated in Houston, sold some properties in Malaysia to international national oil companies at a very, very high price, and rebuilt back in the Gulf of Mexico. During that time, there was a big change in tax in the first Trump administration, where it became very advantageous to move money abroad into the United States and maintain an NOL on the balance sheet to where we were able to sell out of international bring the money home tax-free, and then bought very successful projects in the Gulf of Mexico and have yet to pay any taxes on that. So it was a big strategic move around that.
And so thinking about like your decision-making and your strategy, so again, I think we're pointing out that it's a pretty interesting business. And
It's a very interesting business.
Yeah, the volatility adds to the
Yeah,
interest.
super volatile.
But it says something about your ability to go through those times. So did you adjust during the down times, your style? I mean, I understand you clearly adjusted the business, but how did you think about managing?
Oh, it's just so stressful and difficult. I really don't even remember, actually. All those big collapses are tough. I think now, if you run a public energy company, you have to be having your debt EBITDA around a 1 times and not have very much debt on the balance sheet. You have to be in a situation returning to shareholders through buybacks and dividends and/or both. And you have to have some slight way of growing your company. And those became different ways and at a very low cost. You see a lot of layoffs in the press today from ConocoPhillips. You see Shell and Chevron going through major reorganizations. You see a lot of reduction in staff from the Hess-Chevron merger. Also seeing probably impacts of AI into different types of back office function that people know about or are out there, and that's why they're having these reductions ahead of time. So it's just a never evolving business between the volatility, now OPEC taking a larger market share, and then AI coming in and lower prices at this time. Will those prices go higher? So it requires a constant yearly almost review of what you're doing. It's very, very interesting, but extremely difficult.
And we've been talking about the future, and we let off sort of like your vision of where it goes. And you did say it will have a pretty consistent demand in oil and gas.
Yes.
Given that back in the 70s, we brought energy and oil and gas to the forefront when we had shortages.
Right.
And now I think we're at this position and time where we're going to see a demand and security is important. What would you say about volatility going forward versus what you had to manage through? You think
I think
it's
going to
always
be
there?
continued to be very volatile.
It will be.
I think the next big shoe to drop was, will these OPEC ads, are they real? Can they really, there's some studies and writings today that they're not really making the amount that they've added up to.
Okay.
Meaning they've said they're adding 180, they're really adding 100. It's very difficult to turn on 2 or 3 million barrels of oil a day. That'd be like 10 Murphys. It'd be very difficult to do that. And so I think that we have an administration now that wants to help us a lot on regulatory, mostly on time only, not reform. And then you have this OPEC market share as our administration goes through tariff impacts and the constituency of the president needing lower gas prices. So we're at a difficult time to see oil prices increase until production in the United States slows down, and it'll probably go back up again. But I do not forecast below 60. I think there's enough demand.
Yes.
And you have to also think at some point that OPEC and all of their people in Geneva may have the model right this time on demand. And I think they probably do. It's my personal belief they do.
Their model on demand?
That's why they're increasing the barrels, because they think there's a shortage and there's going to be the demand there. Because they are hurting themselves on price to gain not a large amount of market share, because U.S. oil production's staying quite flat for now.
So would you your successor or someone else running a Murphy or a similar sized company in the future, Roger, do you give them any different advice on how to think about the future, given those things, pay attention to what's going on, or change their strategy?
Well, he had worked with me for a very long time. We worked together for 13 or 14 years. And, I'm kind of guy, you get to see me a lot during the day. So I think he was ready for me to probably leave. And we had 2 or 3 days of meetings about it. And the strategy is pretty much the same. I mean, it's, so the executives we have at our company that are running the company today were part of these collapses of 14 to 16 and COVID. COVID was a really big problem in the oil business. I mean, we went to zero price, and it was a very tough time. And then we did a lot of very successful M&A during that time. And so we kind of were known as a company that does big developments around the world on time and do very successful M&A. So the executive team were there for all that, and they'll continue on with those type things.
Pretty consistent.
Yes.
You opened up one that alluded to, and that was, which I saw as well, was during the shale boom, that was this, the equity window opened up, and the debt window opened up, and the capital raising in
Yes.
the industry was just,
Yes.
was huge, you know,
Yes.
the cash flows, the capital flows. But then there was a shift to the investors were asking for returns.
Correct.
And how do you see that balance going forward? Because it is an industry where you put that production on today, it's going to go down tomorrow. So I've
Right.
got a reinvestment risk. How do you balance rewarding the shareholders, growing the companies?
I think that investors today really aren't going to put up with no returns.
Okay.
So you're going to have to continue to buy back stock as a return mechanism and through dividend. I think most successful companies have their debt level below a 1 turn of cash flow, and they're going to be very able to return at even lower prices. That's why you saw so much consolidation in big shale, because big shale wasn't returning any. Now they're all returning. They too are struggling with their equity during this pullback in oil prices. So I think that's probably not going to change for a long time, and I think that will probably help oil prices go up over the next few years, because there's such a power behind the investors wanting the return. So companies that aren't consistently returning aren't going to do very well in equity markets. Of course, these things change, but I think it's here to stay this time. And let's face it, the problem with energy today, it's a small part of the S&P 500, the lowest it's ever been, even with all these returns. So if we were to make the returns worse, it would be quite difficult. So I think that's probably here to stay for a long time.
So the capital discipline's
here to stay.
question that came in, 8, 10 years ago, you think has some staying power now?
Well, just too much volatility for that.
Otherwise, yeah. So when you're going to think about this reinvestment and where you have an opportunity, you've done some big projects, obviously, but so where is there a place in the world that, if you woke up tomorrow and we're going to reinvest capital in the oil and gas business, where would it be?
Well, I think today in the United States, there's a big major consolidation around big shale.
Okay.
And the Permian's greatly leased up, owned by big players that are very successful at efficiency, and we're seeing all that. I think there's still a big future for onshore Canada in the shale business, and then in Argentina is a big possibility for shale. But the shale business there will struggle because only super major service companies can go there probably. And then the backbone of the U.S. shale was competition to the super major service providers, which brought costs down. And I wonder if they can get the costs in Argentina down. And through the economy of Argentina, getting your money out of Argentina and all the, the surface risks that you have there. But I think that will be the two shale places. You're seeing some look of U.S. companies into Canada now, which has a lot of resources and it's owned publicly, like the Gulf of America is owned, or Gulf of Mexico, and then, of course, Argentina in a different type of regime. But we have to face, over the last few years, 75% of all new reserves have come from offshore.
Okay.
And so offshore conventional, so if you take all the conventional, which offshore is conventional, of course,
right.
It's the real future of the long-term energy needs, because I don't forecast fossil fuels going down that much. And I think offshore will continue to work very well, and especially in deep water. See a big discovery in Brazil, seeing a lot of new data set, a new type of sophisticated seismic being shot in the Gulf of America, West Africa. All those places were left behind during these collapses, and now new data coming forward. And I think being in the ocean is going to be the way.
It will be. It'd be interesting.
The big shale basins are found. Of course, there's always new data and new things happen, but the significant ones, I think, have been located.
And then it seemed like technology obviously was able to make those profitable, or
Yes.
at least allow them to continue to
And really
reinvest.
drilling efficiency too, about
Okay.
working better with tools and equipment that can stay in the hole longer, basically.
Well, that does, it leads to, technology or technique maybe, and I would say that a lot of the industry isn't like a brand new technology, it's applying techniques that are out there often that make it successful. Is there a segment of this upstream industry that you think there's a technology change potential? You know, it's hard to forecast, obviously, what Mitchell did with fracking, but is there, where would there be a big change?
I think there's a big change coming in digital. If you look at the big three service companies today, Halliburton has gone to be the premier fracker of North America,
Okay.
and they're hurting their equity due to the drop in rig count. You see Schlumberger go very big digital transformation type company. If you listen to their earnings call, it's all about digital. And then you have Baker, a famous oil service company, really talking about power generation and an entire new business around compressors, things for LNG and power generation. So digital, so I believe in the future you will have large digital formats of fields, live seismic, constantly updated while drilling, moving decision-making forward on directional ability to change the type of well you're drilling. Partners can see it, all people using the same data at the same time, and I think it will lead with this new type of seismic being shot on the ocean floor, tied into all the real-time drilling. I think will lead to a big movement and change in the offshore deepwater business. I think that when you see in onshore a company pay a lot of money, like ConocoPhillips did, Fang did for Endeavor and others, they may have a digital advantage over the whole of Eagle Ford. So you saw Conoco buy Marathon. They probably have a large digital format of all the wells in the Eagle Ford in a large system, allowing them to have a different view of the return. So I think this digital move of real-time data, real-time drilling will be the next efficiency step in the ocean and for shale as well. And then obviously over time, the shale business will become a big refrac business. Okay. You know, refrac technology will improve over time as well because they're drilling thousands of wells a year. And so that's my view of technology on that.
But it's interesting to hear you say that, you know, we were just speaking about power, electricity, and AI and data centers in the earlier sessions,
Right.
and now we're saying, hey, you know, in the traditional oil and gas industry,
They'll be using a lot of AI
data,
too. I would
it's
imagine
going to be
that.
data and AI.
I think super majors are using more AI than people think today.
Wow, that's very interesting, and that will lead us to, when we get to that, be a skill set issue as
Right.
well. What about balancing? So, you know, one thing you mentioned that the emissions intensity has gone down for
Oh, yes.
traditional oil and gas, and
A lot.
you know, I did review. You know, there's Murphy publishes a sustainability report, as well now a number of companies do. You were really in the industry during a time when that shifted that attention. So I wanted to get your view of, you know, balancing, and whether it's ESG, sustainability, we're just going to collectively, there's a safety and operations thing that's always been there. But how does a leader think about that balance, profitability of your company? How do you incorporate that in this business, in the oil and gas business?
Well, that's a lot of stuff, Pierre, you just brought up there. I think as I look back, there was a big push around ESG sustainability in which everyone formed a very professional sustainability report. And then they would be interactions between the largest shareholders, Fidelity, State Street, people that size, around your discussion around emissions and what you thought about emissions. There were some firms that had very lofty goals about going to net zero because maybe some of their shareholders wanted that. As I look back, though, Murphy was uniquely positioned because we worked offshore and onshore, and people may not understand that offshore oil and gas production in Gulf of America is the lowest emission per BOE by far in the world. And
Say that again. So the oil and gas production offshore deep water, in terms of its
per barrel equivalent, is the lowest in the world.
Yeah.
Not even close. Onshore, very, very high. Onshore is getting better because the firms are bigger and they consolidate and they have to. As I look back on all that, what people really wanted, the SEC during the prior administration was pushing a lot of regulatory around sustainability reports being part of your 10K and things of that nature. As I look back, they just really were starving for disclosure in a certain format that you get from these big agencies that look after ESG. So of all that sustainability report, there's a lot of great information, but in the back is a table that's per a standard that talks about all your emissions that you have. then investors are fully informed about the type of emissions you have and the type of emission intensity that you have, and they can form their desire to, invest or not in the stock. And I think for some of the big houses, you became almost investable or not investable.
Okay.
And Murphy, of course, the leader in that, never really had an issue with that. So we didn't have an issue because we had so much offshore production that our emission per BOE is very low. Now, super majors, of course, have integrated and have, refineries, which are not as, much more difficult. That's why they're leading toward hydrogen and they're leading toward direct capture.
CCUS.
So that's kind of what people wanted. I'm not a believer in E&P companies focusing on investing in renewables.
Okay.
I think that's really never going to work and not a really good idea. That's really super major country. And if you dig into it, their rates of return are too low on that. And all those rates of return have to have subsidies, which are now out of kilter with this administration, which could come back and forth. And that won't lead to a long-term decision on those type of capital. And I think it's really a shareholder decision around ESG or around, is the company investing in oil and gas, is that we return through dividends and cash to you, then you can go buy the renewable company of your choice.
Right.
I think it's the best way. There's not much pushback on what I'm saying on that today. And there's a live example in BP. BP, under a prior leader, said they were going to cut their oil production by 40% by 2030. Their total return during this 5-year period is 35%, and Shell is 82, and Exxon's 160.
Yeah.
So, I think that kind of says it all right there.
But I think what I heard you say that, what was important was the disclosure, the transparency,
Yes.
the SASB standards,
All
they're
that.
there. And so as long as we,
If you don't have that, then you just really are operating. And that won't change with this administration, or once you start doing that, you need to continue to do that if you're a good company. And so I think that's fine. There could be some emission standards. People could go up higher and still disclose it possibly now with the new EPA leader that we have. But in general, I think everyone wants to lower emissions. I think oil production in the United States from 2015 to 2022 went up 40%, and emissions went down, methane went down 37%. So also, when you capture the emission, you sell the gas. So infrastructure became bigger, flowing wells without gas infrastructure became out of kilter. And all those things came about. That was primarily in the Permian. That's all been resolved. And now people want to capture the gas and sell it. And as you get more LNG to solve this anti-Russian Europe situation, you will have less emissions because people want to capture all the gas.
Yeah, it's interesting that, some of the super majors were aligned around methane, controls because, of course, it's a product to sell. Also,
Yes.
maybe
we sell it.
Maybe a competitive
Sell it for
advantage.
$3.09 today. It's not very much.
Why should
That's
you
what
try
it
to
sells for.
keep it from leaking out? I'll just remind everyone there is a QR code. I think maybe it's on to my right. So I've got a couple questions, and I'll try to save a few minutes at the end, and would be glad to entertain. Roger committed to answering some if you have some. So we went into this regulatory environment question, and we were talking about that earlier too. And I think we've also mentioned, sort of the back and forth, the swing on that. How do you think about changes in the policy environment? Again, to your decision making, how did you manage through changes in policy? There's been some pretty dramatic ones.
Well, during my time, we've been really heavily regulated in Gulf of America, or Gulf of Mexico, for a very long time, my entire career. The head of the regional office of the Minerals Management Services here in New Orleans. It was very heavily regulated as to flaring, very heavily regulated as to drilling rules, production. Everything's been heavily regulated. So it's really nothing new for me.
Okay.
After Macondo, I think we had a lot more unneeded regulatory placed on deep water drilling. That was never needed or hasn't done any good. But this administration here bragging about helping regulatory, but from my knowledge of industry today, it's really around timing, permit timing being quicker. It's quite a chore to get a deep water well approved today here in New Orleans. and exploration plans approved. Also, we didn't have any leasing for a very long time now. So this administration's pro-leasing in more places. I think only 10% of the United States is available to lease today. But they're really focusing under director of the new leader of Interior on timing, not really reform. So the big beautiful bill, for lack of a better word, is focused on all the timing matters around regulatory. I'm not working anymore there, but it really hasn't changed a thing. I think it's kind of a silly thing. It really hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed?
No.
So you would run the business the same
way?
way?
It's still the same process to get a permit approved today.
Yeah.
There are workshops that improve it going on today, here in New Orleans today. But this administration's a timing. Now, from a regulatory standpoint to the other administration, the Biden administration, it really was anti-pipeline from Canada, any kind of way to stop a pipeline and stop the energy from moving where we need it. And that was really their idea of way of holding back fossil fuels, was by pipeline problems. So that's a big focus of this administration and should be done and will be improved.
Yeah,
onshore pipelines, either fuel, diesel, jet fuel, and oil and gas into Pennsylvania, New York, et cetera.
Or potentially even, as we've discussed, CO2.
Yeah, correct. Got to move that around as well.
Yeah.
Sure.
I guess let me check now. I've got maybe some others, but is there a question in the back? The voice in the back.
Over your career, what have you seen to be the primary catalyst for industry consolidation periods, and what might drive future industry consolidation periods?
A lot of times I think it's CEOs about to retire maybe, and big payouts for their staff, and it reach a point where what will be your multiple expansion, and will there be someone to dance with you at the prom that will allow you to have a very nice situation for your shareholders. If you're repurchased by ConocoPhillips, a major successful company, you see a very successful company in Fang or Diamondback in the Permian. Devon, of course, sold to Exxon, Anadarko to Oxy. These are very large deals in which they take a lot of synergy out of the business, a lot of costs out of the business, and then get things organized around lower and more efficiency in shale was a big driver. More land, able to drill longer lateral wells. And then they're all able to consolidate and then sell off properties that don't fit their new core, all chasing Exxon's performance right now, quite frankly. The leader by far in margin. And and it's also, if you make, 2 or 3 million barrels a day like a super major does, you have to replace a lot of barrels every year.
Yeah.
And it's almost practically impossible. So the merging has become a source of that. And also you see a lot of big exploration by super majors today in big rank areas. So consolidation is you need to lower your cost structure and to allow for more efficiency. And now with AI and back office costs, it'll become more. So we're probably going to go through a period of more consolidation again.
Interesting. Well, that is topical. And again, in class we were just talking about the fact that the industry is a price taker. And so the things you control are your costs, your efficiency, your capital expenditures. So it does make a lot of sense.
You also have an administration probably be more favorable to merging, acquisition, approval.
Okay. And you mentioned potentially taking advantage, having the right capital structure to take advantage of downturns.
Right.
Yeah. Pretty insightful there. Another question. Is there another?
Can you comment on subsidies provided to horizontal drilling technology in fracking and for marginal wells?
What was the first part of the question?
I think it was subsidies for horizontal drilling, but then I think there's a question about technology as well.
I'm not aware of any subsidies. Every industry has certain tax write-offs of their equipment, depreciation, in which the oil industry is no different than another type of manufacturer. There's a lot of efficiency going on because during the growth periods, all the big super shale companies were in such pressure to grow, and then now that they've merged and got so powerful and large in the Permian, they're able to drill on one pad and drill multiple strata more efficiently than they were before. And then now that they've merged and combined, they have more top-tier locations to drill. And so they're running through this nice efficiency thing, and it'll last for the next few years. But then obviously we'll have to change. You can't, if you drill 500 wells a year and there's 5 companies doing that, that's 2,500 wells a year times 5 years. Those wells can't be as good as the ones today.
Right.
There'll be a lot of pressure to make those efficiency works, but it'll be very difficult. And that'll lead to a more of other types of oil and gas and offshore and other regions in my view.
Do you ascribe to this, the theory about, you know, whether we drilled up the most we're talking about onshore, obviously. The industry's drilled up their profitable wells already, and we're getting into the tier 2s?
I would say probably not yet.
Okay.
Because you still see oil production with way less rigs and about the same oil production for the last couple of years with hundreds of rigs less. So the rigs are drilling longer wells, and you're just not seeing that in production. And the real test of time around oil prices with OPEC coming to bear with more additions is how long can that efficiency stay there?
Okay.
And I would say 2 to 3 years to be my opinion.
Settled.
But things evolve and change, but that's the way I see that. That's why they merge to get more tier 1.
Yeah, okay.
Eventually, though, they will run out of that.
They will.
They all
at some
will.
point. Yeah.
Well, you see EOG going into the Middle East now for the first time, one of the more successful shale players in North America. So they're now doing a shale project in the Middle East. So those are big. That's a big strategic change.
Another one?
How do government incentives and regulations shape business decisions, and how do you adjust strategies when administrations change?
Yeah.
Like I said before, Murphy, the company I ran, and many, many companies similar, all of our lands in North America are private. So we're not under federal rules. We're under Texas Railroad Commission or different things around spacing and regulatory through Texas Railroad Commission, Texas around flaring. But the Gulf of America has been heavily regulated for a very long time. So the Trump administration today is working on reducing the permit timing, but the regulatory burden of what you need to report and how you execute and how you're inspected is the same. So I don't think that it's a big change in how you run the company, because all companies have an ethical standard to do things the right way.
Okay.
We don't want to flare. We don't want to hurt people. We want to, continue to improve. It's another big change in the industry's safety. And so I don't really see a big change in regulatory, because most companies have their own culture around doing the right thing.
Right.
And, there's been a lot of reduction in oil companies in the United States. So everyone left has that culture. I don't see that regulatory. I was just seeing the head of the energy secretary around how much money they're saving us on regulatory, the Trump administration. I don't really see any at all, quite frankly. Maybe the timing, that will come to bear over time. And that will be less costly, I suppose, but I don't see that.
Well, we were just talking about policy in class again, and there's, there are federal level policies, but there's company level policies too. You don't,
every company has
don't design it well a certain way.
Their goals around emissions presented to their board. Every board has an ESG type regulatory committee reviewing carbon emissions, methane emissions, goals around that internal. I don't see that really changing by administration. Once you start doing that, you can't go back and forth on that. So I think that's all in place. I don't see it changing. I think it's a misnomer about the industries. We really want to have less emissions, and we don't run around and change all of our rules when we have a change of administration. It just really doesn't happen.
Well, to speak to particularly the deep water, these are large, complex, long-lived, and so when you make a decision, you have to consider a long time frame that might have different administrations during the period of the production of that.
Well, typical lease, they're 10 to 12 years, and you have the right, when you lease the property, to develop your lands under those rules. So these administrations really don't want to go to court about that. So I don't really see that changing a whole lot.
Okay.
And it never has.
Yeah. Is there another one, or I've got some?
Yes. How would you make the oil industry more attractive to young people?
Did a great setup because we were talking about the petroleum engineers.
I just can't explain to people how interesting it is, and how mundane engineering can be working in a factory or something like that. I've never seen an industry more interesting than the oil and gas business from an engineer or finance. I think it's going to become more and more interesting as technology continues to work. It's also a very high-tech industry. It's a misunderstanding if you think oil and gas isn't very high-tech. There's enormous technological advances in the oil business over my career, and I can see that continuing to go. I think if you're looking to work in the business, you need the best you can understand the culture of the place where you're working and try to get as close to the field as you can when you're young and gain that experience, because that field office interface will never be replaced by technology. There's always going to be someone on the phone talking about an oil well, and I don't see that ever changing.
That was a line of questioning because we did speak about that, and it's a physical business, and
Yes.
I think it was a comment from.
No, there's enormous data around all the
Fair.
wells, and you can
Yeah.
see on your
Yeah.
phone every well's
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah.
It's coming more and more and more. You can see a well live fracking, you can see a well offshore being completed on your phone at home. But there's still things that happen in the business that require personal interaction, in my view, and it's a long way going away. Our companies that get away from that won't do as well. Let me say it like that.
And that was, you mentioned your career, and I was mentioning, when you got out, you went out there to where the work was being done.
Yes.
And then obviously.
That changed my life, actually.
And really,
For
just
sure.
knowing what was being done and the amount of effort in the field.
Just seeing it and working there and working as a very young person, running one of these rigs alone when I was 24 was a big deal. It
Yeah.
changed me.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest changes in my life.
So, I think the question was, how do you make this industry attractive? Because more attractive, let's say. We have a decline curve, we have a demand flat, we have to reinvest capital, we need,
Yeah,
people
it's incredible
retiring.
technology.
We need new people coming in, and you would advise them to get exposure to the operations. I heard earlier about, understanding how to manage data and information as well.
Yes, sure, of course. The new young interns that we have are much better with the data and can do data work much better than our time. What the real thing is that's going on today is when I worked in the early 80s, if you have a pie of experience, it was this much practical and this much technical. And today's employees are this much technical, they can't really work without the data, and this much practical because of the collapses and all the rig count drops.
Okay.
And the reductions in force and way less people working today for oil companies than they were in the 80s. So I just see that the need to be more practical is be a big advantage to people.
Being out there and seeing.
And companies that work that way will be advantaged as well.
Yeah.
Can't build a spreadsheet to answer everything.
Need to know how to do this.
You need to know how to do it, sure,
But you better be
We
out
can
there.
get all kinds of people to do that.
Yeah, exactly, or AI. Might have time for one more question in the back?
Yes.
It's the brightest lights I've ever had on my face.
Through the ups and downs of such a volatile market, how did you stand out compared to competitors in rough times and in good times?
Stand out in what way? I guess equity performance?
Well, you lasted. You were independent.
Yeah, I never lost my job in 42 years. And there's a lot of people did, and there's hardly anybody in the oil business that's 64 years old.
Yeah.
And there's nobody hardly left. So I guess through all that, I think I work for a very historic, long-term company with a lot of ownership at the board level.
Yeah.
That been through it all from went public in 1957, probably been in business 100 years. So I worked at a different type of company with the owners at the board that are used to lots of ups and downs. And so that's very advantageous. Also, so there's opportunities when things go down, which we were able to take advantage of a few times. I think just being tough, just being, being a regular guy from Louisiana and making it. It's a tough business. And so I can't remember all the things that happened, but it was an enormous, volatile time. My whole career's been that way.
Yeah.
And not just mine, all of my peers as well. So
But-
the OPEC collapse in 14 and COVID were pretty tough.
Okay.
Probably doesn't get much worse than that, but it'll never get worse since COVID
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So our whole industry was destroyed by that.
When oil went
If
negative.
it hasn't been for vaccines, there would have been hardly any oil industry left.
Yeah,
That's my personal opinion.
yeah, there are a lot of stories there.
Yeah.
Well, we're really, really grateful for your time and sharing your expertise. You know, you've had an amazing career in this industry that I think, you know, what we wanted to draw out was this is a really interesting place, and I know it's attractive
Oh,
to
yes.
get involved in power and utilities, which I like that too, don't get me wrong, but I think was noted that energy is a place to be, and oil and gas is going to be a major component of energy going forward, so it's a pretty fascinating business. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh,
So
no
if you
problem.
could
Thank you.
Join me in a round of applause for Roger.
Thank you for joining us
Perfect
for this
timing.
session.
Perfect
Our
timing.
next session in this space will be challenges and misconceptions around critical minerals,
Yep,
which is
perfect,
scheduled to
perfect.
start in
Yeah.
just a few minutes.